I do appreciate y'all coming out. It's the coldest morning we've had yet here in Vidalia, and I know we got some folks, the cold just getting out and it's just too hard on them, and so we'll pray for them while they're still back at the house, and I think we got some folks traveling as well today. But as I said, if you got your Bibles, 1 Samuel chapter number 21, verse 1 reads as the following. It says, "Then came David to Nob to Amalek the priest, and Amalek was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, no man with thee? And David said unto Amalek the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee. And what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what is there present? And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy. And the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread, that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdsmen that belonged to Saul." We're going to stop there this morning, but we will make our way through the entire chapter today. But I want to take a little bit of time and teach you on this thought, David in distress. David in distress. Let's pray together this morning. I'm going to ask Brother Dale if he would lead us today. You may be seated. We've been following for David quite some time here the last few weeks. We've followed him from when that he was the shepherd boy that was brought before Samuel. We found him as the valiant warrior that defeated Goliath when nobody else would go battle him. We found him that he was placed as the commander, as a chief leader in the army of the nation of Israel. And then we found him in a place that where Saul, the King Saul, had become so enraged by him because of his popularity, that he had defeated so many, that he had slain so many. They would say Saul had killed thousands, but David had killed tens of thousands. And from that very moment, at that time, Saul was overtaken by an evil spirit of the Lord, and from that moment on, he had a hatred towards David. And so we know this morning, the only thing Saul cares about is that he desires to kill David. That's all he wants to do. It's all he thinks about. He's been so overtaken by him. He's tried throwing the javelin at him many times already. He's very upset, and he would send out messengers to do the dirty work, and he sent out the messengers to Ramah, as we looked at last week or a couple weeks ago. And what happened to them? Well, they were then overcome by the Holy Spirit, and they even began to prophesy. Saul went himself to Ramah to kill David. And guess what? Holy Spirit came upon him and protected David as well. And so we found ourselves last week that David was so inclined to believe this, that there was a possibility that Saul was going to come back around to loving him again. Well, we learned last week that didn't work out. That Saul still had a deep hatred for him, still wanted him dead. Jonathan, Saul's son, saw that in his daddy, and he met with David and told David, he said, here's what's going to happen. You need to leave for your own life. And so we found ourselves here this morning with where David went to. When he met with Jonathan out in that field, and he told him that the report that his father still wanted him dead, that he had to go. And so here's where he went. The Bible tells us here in the beginning that he went to Nob. He went to Nob and went to visit the priest. So if he went to Nob and he went to the priest, it means this, that he went to the tabernacle. But he came before the priest Amalek, and as verse says 21, Amalek was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? Now I want us to take a moment here, because he's saying, Why art thou alone, and that there's no man with you, but he did have people with him. He had his servants with him. The reason that he said, why do you have no man with him, is because the servants were seen less than the others that could have been with him. And so it's as if they were never there, but he did have some with him as he traveled here to Nob. And he comes before Amalek in verse 2, and he says, And David said unto Amalek the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Pretty vague explanation that David gives to Amalek of why he's there. But not only is it the explanation that he gives, the problem is that those that have been with us last few weeks know this. Saul didn't send David to the tabernacle. Saul didn't send David to Nob. David went under his own pretense, under his own desire, to find a place that he might be safe. So he thought, if I could be safe anywhere, maybe it'd be at the tabernacle. But when he is asked why he was there, he lied. He just bold-faced lied. I'm not sure why he felt like he needed to lie, but he did. And we're looking at the title this morning of David's distressing, and here's the thing that we understand about people. When we are under distress, we can act out of character. When we're under distress, we can definitely make some poor choices in our lives. And David, we're beginning to see the downward spiraling of David. From this moment forward for David, what we're going to see about his life is a lot of things of what is recorded, that he recorded in the book of Psalms. That he is now being treated as a criminal. He's now an outcast, if you will. His life is being pursued everywhere he goes. He has the servants of Saul after him all the days of his life, and he can no longer go back to the city of where that he was loved. He can't go back to his home, to his wife Michal. He can't return back to his job. He is just going to be on the run for his days. And I think if we all found ourselves in that situation, I think we'd agree with this. I think we'd be distressed as well. I don't think that he necessarily had to lie to Amalek why he was there. But he did. The first point I want to look at is he was distressed and lying. I think the first thing he did, he made a smart choice when in his moment of distress and looking for a place of safety. He went to the Lord's house. That I pray that it's an option that we all find, that when we come under times of discouragement and times of distress, that maybe a good source of reprieve would be to go into God's house, to go to the church house, to hear from the Word, to sing songs of worship, to be around other people, to be people that you can confide in and bear witness with one another and tell each other the truth and in love and compassion and maybe be encouraged. And he went, and he did go to Nob to do that, but the problem was he lied when he got there. And how often I see it throughout. I've been here for a little over 5 years. I was in Cumming for quite some time, for about 7 or 8 years on staff, and here's what I found. People go to the church house for a lot of different reasons. People go because there are a lot more situations. There's a lot of emotions going on. There's a lot of differences in their lives, and some come and they'll tell you why they're there, and some come and they'll lie to you that everything's okay. And here's what I found: it's okay to tell somebody it's not okay. David knew this, that his life was not okay. His state of his mind was not okay. And my friends, his lying became the downward spiral of his life. Not only did he lie, but he lied to the priest. He lied to him and said that he was sent there of Saul, and he didn't even know what to say with his Saul. He even said in the latter portion of verse 2, and he said, I commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. How vague could he really be that he says, I don't even have the details for you, but he just says, you just go and you go to such and do such and such a thing. That was his answer. And I believe that he lied for this very one reason. He did not believe that he was going to have the Lord's protection. Why else would he lie to the priest? Was he afraid that the priest was going to sell him out? Was he afraid that the priest was going to reach back out to Saul and let him know David was in his presence? Was he afraid of what was going to take place? That the very place that he went for safety, he also felt like he couldn't have it if he were to be honest about it? When we lie, we need to acknowledge this. A lie is always a lie, even if you think it's for your protection. I think we can all agree this morning. We've all lied. We've told big lies, we've told little lies, we've told white lies, we've told big old fat black lies. We've lied for protection of ourselves. We've lied to not hurt other people's feelings. We've had reasons for our lies, but my friends, when the Lord looks upon it, he still sees it as a lie. There's this misconception at times that we like to believe, I think, that if he'll understand why we do what we do, maybe he'll understand why we say what we say. Maybe he'll understand this lie this time and everything will be okay. But it's never worked that way. It goes on. In verse 3, he says, "Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or what is there present?" And the priest answered David and said, "There is no common bread under my hand, but there is hollowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women." So not only has he gone from the king's table of the feast, but he's finding himself now at the tabernacle begging just for food. He's saying, what kind of bread you got? What do you have? Do you have the regular bread? Do you have anything that you could give to me? Anything that's here at this present time that I can have? And the priest looks at him and says, all I have is the showbread. That's all I got left is the showbread. And you know this, David, the showbread's not for you. The showbread is symbolic, and the showbread is for presentation. The showbread is for the priests. And David still believes that even in this situation that he believes that he should have the showbread. Now I want us to remind you of something this morning, that the showbread was a symbolic representation to the nation of Israel for those that came to the tabernacle. Upon the table of showbread, it was one of the pieces of furniture, was the 12 loaves. Why did they have 12 loaves? Because of the 12 tribes of Israel. What was it to be a representation? It was supposed to be a representation of God's meeting their provisions while they're in the wilderness for 40 years. That God fed them from manna from heaven above, right? And he did it on a daily basis. That when they came, that they saw that bread and see how the Lord sustained them for the 40 years to the 12 tribes as a representation to remember. And he said, of the 12, I want 5. I believe it kind of lets me understand how many men were with him. I'd imagine he wanted one for himself and one for every man that might have been with him. But the very thing that David is finding himself begging for, of the provisions he needs, was the very reminder to the nation of Israel that God meets our provisions. The very thing that it seemed like he had almost forgotten, that if the Lord was going to guide him and protect him in his days, if it was part of the Lord's will for him to be sent out from Saul's palace, that the Lord was going to take care of him on the way. He believes he starts to have to start lying for his protection. Now he's believing he's going to have to beg for his provisions. Why? Because in his downward spiral of distress, there's been a losing and lacking of faith. And I pray this morning that we can understand this, that when we are going through struggles of distress, I believe a lot of times it's because we are losing our faith as well. In verse 5 it says, "And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a true woman have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is of man are common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. I believe this. I believe we come to a point in this scripture where we start to think about, did the priest do the right thing? This was sanctified bread. This was holy bread. This was to feed the priests, to feed their families. And 5 of it was taken to given to David. And we're coming to this point of, did he do the right thing? And I believe he did. I believe the priest acted in the right way, and I believe this: when people come begging for provisions and we have the extra, the Lord's provided the extra, and we can meet a need, I believe it's the right thing to do. Y'all have heard me say it before, I've never regretted being too good to somebody. I've regretted not being good enough. I've regretted dismissing, but I've never regretted being too good to somebody. Well, why do I believe that? Well, I believe that because even Jesus Christ himself references this very moment. Let's go over to the New Testament. Let's go over to the Gospel of Matthew and see what Jesus said about this himself. Now, to pick up where we're at here in Matthew chapter 12, we're finding that Jesus and his disciples are walking through. They're coming to a cornfield, and they decide that they're hungry on the Sabbath, that they're going to break off some corn from the husk, and they're going to eat thereof. And, of course, guess what happens? Here comes the Pharisees. The Pharisees, we know this, were the naysayers the whole time. Every single time Jesus did something, the Pharisee had something to say. Every single time a miracle happened, the Pharisee had a question to happen. And church, that's just the way life is always going to be. There are going to be those that are going to be thankful to see that your needs are met, and there are going to be those that don't care. There's going to be people that are glad to see God working, and there's going to be people questioning how it happened. They're not going to be excited that it happened. They want to know why or how it happened. And I believe that this is something that has infiltrated the churches today. That I believe there are too many Pharisees asking the questions than there are disciples being thankful for the work of God. We're not thankful that people worship. We're questioning how they do it. We're not thankful for the songs of worship. We're questioning why we're using those. We're not thankful that something happened on a certain day. We're questioning why it was that day and not maybe on Sunday. We got questions about if you can worship on the actual Sabbath, if you can't, if you can do these things. And my friends, here's what I found. There's people that are going to question everything you do. And they can question it, but it doesn't mean you're wrong. And they can question it, but it doesn't mean they're right as well. Look what Jesus Christ said about it, Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. At the time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were hungered and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was hungered, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God and did eat of the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests. Do I believe he did the right thing and the priest feeding him? Yes, I do. But here's the flip side of it. The Lord definitely knew about his condition. The Lord, he references it back here in the New Testament among the Pharisees. And if he knew it then, I believe this, that he knew it when David did it. And if the Lord knows you need it, I believe the Lord can feed it. I believe the Lord knows you are in need of the provision. He can meet that need. He was very much using this example in defense of himself, in defense of, and making that situation, if you will, of him being the priest and him making sure that his disciples are fed. He said, you're so worried about the law, but you don't understand something that I've come and I've overcome the law. And we're seeing here, there was a lack of faith of his protection. There was a lack of faith in his provisions that could have been from the Lord. But now we're seeing this morning, where we left off in our text reading. In verse 7 it says, now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day. So it just so happened, while David and his servants were there at the tabernacle among the priests, there also just so happened to be a servant of the king Saul. And his name was Doeg. He was an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to the Saul. And here's what I believe Doeg has been watching this get played out. He's watching it develop. He's watching it happen. He sees David show up, and you better believe this, Doeg knew who David was. I'm wondering at times if Saul might have known that there might have been some places that David might have gone to. And maybe he started putting different men in different places to see if David was going to show up there. That he thought surely if he left Ramah, surely if he left here, he'd probably go to wherever the tabernacle is if he really is the man that God made him to be. Or was it just by chance that Doeg was there? In church, we're about to see this morning. We're about to see David's small lie that we think we could kind of dismiss and saying that it is for protection. Who wouldn't lie to protect your own life? But it doesn't mean it's okay. We're about to see the big impact. That what some would consider a small lie, we're about to see the big impact it's about to have. Doeg, in the presence of the lie, he does this. You better believe it, he went back and told Saul, Saul, I saw David and Nob. I saw him with Amalek the priest, and I saw the priest taking care of him. I saw the priest feeding him and his men. I saw him meeting his needs, meeting the provisions, giving him everything he needed to sustain his life. The very thing you want from him, they're sustaining to him. And I know this, I'm telling you, that means Amalek didn't tell you. You with me? We're going to do a little bit of a spoiler for next week in chapter 22. Here's what happens when Doeg goes back to tell Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 17. And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king will not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. And the king said to Doeg, turn thou and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned and fell upon the priest, and slew on that day fourscore persons that did wear a linen ephod. The linen ephod being the garb of the priest. That's how they identified who the priests were, by what they wore. And he said if they're wearing the ephod, you kill them. Why? Because Amalek protected him. And for him protecting him, here's what we're going to do. We're going to kill all of the priests there. His little lie that he told Amalek, that little lie that he told him in the presence of Doeg, that he was there for a reason, I believe that's why Amalek never said anything. It's because he believed that Saul knew he was there. I think if he had been honest with Amalek, Amalek probably would have understood what was at stake. But not only would have been at stake for Amalek's life himself, but 85, my friends, that's 85 priests were killed by Doeg. But it doesn't stop there. In verse 19 of chapter 22 it said, Nob the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses, and sheep with the edge of the sword. He didn't stop at the 85 priests, but he went about the city, killing the men, killing the women, killing the children, killing the babies, killing the livestock, wiping them all out. All because, remember, Saul's desire and his hatred towards David because of his jealousy towards him. And here's how David knew he messed up. We're going to drop down a few verses into verse 22. It reads as this. Look at it with me. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg was there. What day? He's speaking of the day that he went to Amalek and Doeg was there. So David knew Doeg was there. Doeg knew David was there. And he said, I knew that day he was there that he would surely tell Saul. And I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Abiathar, one of the children of Amalek, was one of the very few that survived the attack. And David said, it's because I showed up. It's because I lied to your daddy and told him Saul knew I was there. He, trying to protect his own life, ended up costing the lives of how many? Him trying to protect his own home cost the homes of others to be completely wiped out because he told a lie about why he was there. Harsh reality, isn't it? It's a reminder to know this, that a lot of times we think our sin, because David knew he was doing wrong when he lied. A lot of times the greatest lie the devil will tell you is that your sin will only affect you. But I believe through God's word we've seen that our little sins affect others in a greater way than we'll ever know. I think if the Lord would have told David, when you go to Nob, you better not lie, because if you lie, they're going to kill 85 priests. They're going to wipe out families. They're going to wipe out homes. They're going to wipe out the livestock. And you just need to protect yourself. Believe that I'm going to guide you and protect you throughout these days. But my friend, that's not the way the Lord works. Why? Because that's not how faith works. It's not faith when he tells you on the front hand. Faith is just moving forward and trusting and believing that he's going to do what he's already promised. We're looking on here quickly this morning. Verse 8 and 9, he says, And David said to Amalek, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it. For there is no other save that here. And David said, There is none like that. Give it me. Friends, let's remember who David is. David was the young man that went to battle with Goliath the Philistine, and he didn't have no armor with him. He didn't have no weapons with him. He didn't have a spear. He didn't have a sword. All he took was a slingshot and 5 rocks. And he went against the whole Philistine army. Why? Because he had faith that he was the anointed one by God. But look now where he finds himself in distress. Now he just thinks, now I got to have a weapon with me. I need protection, I need provisions, and I need something to protect my life. I need a sword. And he says, Amalek, what do you have here? And he's like, man, it's the tabernacle. We don't have no weapons for you. All we have is the sword from Goliath, of whom you killed. Now here's the thing. Here's what we know. David's very familiar with this sword. Why? Because it's the very same sword that he took and cut off Goliath's head. I believe this. We found ourselves here quite years later. I imagine David has grown in size. He's probably grown in stature. We don't know exactly how long it's been, but it's been quite a while to this that he came to the point there, I think I can tote this thing around. And he said, it's all we got. And here's what I found. Throughout this, he keeps coming to this point. Look at what the priest keeps saying to David. David says, hey, all I got is the showbread, but you can have it. The priest says, all we got is this one sword from the Goliath that's been wrapped, and we put it in the quarter to remind her of the victory and deliverance that the nation of Israel has from the Philistines. It's all we got, but you can have it. And my friends, I'm still believing that's the way the church is today. We don't have a whole lot, but you can have what we got. Here's what I found in a small church. You don't have a whole lot to offer. You don't have a whole lot to give out, but you can have what we got. Silver and gold hath I none, but we do have this, and you can have this if you want it. We may not have the programs, but we got the word, and you can have that. We may not have the band, but we got a couple ladies out saying you can have that. We don't have big comfy chairs, but we got pews, and you can have that. You with me? And I believe it could be enough. I may not have enough to give you everything to sustain you, but I could get you to the bat next time you come back. He desired the sword, and he said this, there's none like that. Give it me. He said, of all the swords, there's none like that one. Of all the weapons that we could have, there's none like that one. That one was made special. That one was made for a man that was a giant, over 9 to almost 10 feet tall. Give me that one. And church, lastly this morning, he's distressed and then acts out of character. Verse 10. And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. How odd. Did you see what just happened? He was at the tabernacle, but he knew what he had done that day because Doeg was there, that Saul was going to know David was present in Nob, and he said, I have to go. And there was a lot of places I believe that David could have gone, but where did he choose to go? He went to the king Achish of Gath. Now let's remember, Goliath, he was Goliath of what? He was Goliath of Gath. This was the place of the Philistines, the very enemy of whom he fought against, the very enemy of whom he killed tens and tens and tens of thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands. He says, maybe I'll be safe there. It's amazing to me how when people, when they lose the faith, when they come under distress, they go to all the wrong places. They go to the wrong places looking for protection. They go to the wrong places looking for safety. Why would the king of his enemy be the one to protect him? But in his mind, it made sense. I wrote it down like this. When you are distressed and lacking of faith, there will be a delusional view of where you need to be. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people leave church because they get discouraged, because they get distressed, because things aren't going like they thought, because they thought maybe I'll be better off outside of it. And I've seen people leave the church believing they think they're going to be better off, and it doesn't work that way. Why did you think going out to the world was going to make it better? Why did you think going back to your old life would make it better? Why did you think going back to serving the world was going to make your life better? But people do. In verse 11 it says, "And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain thousands, but David 10,000s? The very people of the enemy that he was trying to blend in with. It was as if he had forgotten what God has done for David and how he used David at victory after victory after victory. But here's the thing, the enemy never forgot. I think he was so delusional, so blinded by his distress that he forgot all of what God had done for him. But guess who hadn't? The Philistines hadn't forgotten. He says that they looked at him and said, Is that David? That the people sang about? The same David, the king that's going to be king of the land, the same David that killed tens and tens thousands of people? Why is he here? King, don't you realize who that is? And I believe he knew who he was. We're seeing this. Are y'all seeing the downward spiraling? That in the beginning of the chapter we started at the tabernacle in Nob with the priest, and now we're with the king of the enemy in the land of Gath. That's what sin does. I'm going to read the last 4 verses of our chapter this morning. It says in verse 12, "And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. And then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I not need of mad men, that ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" We're seeing David going from a noble, loving, anointed man that the Lord has put his stamp of approval on, called him out to be the king of the nation, and now he's before the king of Gath, his very enemy, acting like a maniac. He said, here's how I'm going to protect myself. I'll just act like I'm crazy. I'll just act like a lunatic. I'll just act like I've lost it. I'm going to start flailing around. I'm going to start climbing up on the doors. I'm going to have my spit coming down into my beard, and I'll just act crazy, and maybe they'll just take mercy on me that I'm just insane. We see that a lot in our court systems. When people do horrific things, they'll just claim insanity, looking for a lighter plea. Knowing, though, the reason that they're there is because they've done wrong. And maybe they'll take mercy on me. Maybe I can get off a little bit easier if I just act and plead that I'm insane. And I believe David's found himself thinking how much of a last resort this must be. That he probably went to the last place he needed to be. He's before the king of Achish, the last person he's to be in front of. And he's acting like the exact opposite, more like a demon-possessed man than a man that's being anointed by God. But let's not forget this. Achish knew that David was faking. Achish knew that David was faking. They had met with each other before, they communed with each other before. It wasn't until the servants came before Achish and said, "Isn't this David?" And it said, because then David changed his behavior and started acting different. How do you know somebody's fallen away? You can tell a lot by their behavior. They act one way, then all of a sudden they start acting another. Why? Because they're afraid. What are they afraid of? They're afraid about something in their lives. There's a lack of faith that the Lord's going to lead. There's a lack of faith that the Lord's going to provide. There's a lack of faith that the Lord's going to protect them. And my friend, they're going to go to places they shouldn't go. They're going to say things they shouldn't say. And they're going to act in ways that they shouldn't act. David's doing the things that an anointed man of the Lord should not do. And you say, well, what does that have to do with us this morning? It has everything for us to do this morning. Why? Because it's a matter of time before you face discouragement. It's a matter of time before you get distressed. But just because you become distressed doesn't mean you have to stay distressed. Just because you become distressed doesn't mean you got to act out of character. Just because you become distressed doesn't mean you have to lie. It doesn't mean you have to leave the church. It doesn't mean you have to go to places that you're not supposed to be. But my friend, there's something that happens in the mind that causes people to do the wrong things. And it's because they're no longer thinking about the Lord. They're thinking about themselves. And when we become center-minded, my friends, we're beginning to fail ourselves when it's about you. When he lied to Amalek, he was thinking about himself. He wasn't thinking about the men and women of Nob that were about to be killed because of him lying. They could have lived if he'd never gone, but he did. I think if David could have killed so many, I think he could have handled Doeg on his own. Don't you think? But he didn't. Why? I wonder if he just felt like he couldn't battle anymore. I wonder if he just felt like he couldn't be used of the Lord anymore. And it's what happens when people get distressed. Doesn't matter. It matters more than you think. Will it affect anybody else? It'll affect a whole lot more people than you think. Does he know where I go? He knows exactly where you go. Does he know what I need? He knows exactly what you need. And he has it for you. And he has plenty of it. You just got to trust that he does. Amen. Let's stand to our feet. Those who can, let's gather around the altar this morning.